So today, what we wanted to do was bring you the stories of these two portfolio companies, and very specifically the journey of the amazing progress that they've made in securing these coveted partnerships in healthcare so that they can scale their work and really begin to transform care delivery. So we're so proud of their work and honored to have our esteemed guest today. So let me do some quick introductions and we'll jump right into it. So we have Stefan Behrens. He founded Gyant in 2016. He's a repeat entrepreneur in the digital consumer space. And Stefan's passionate, as you'll see, about improving patient access to health information and the appropriate care at scale. And what I really love about Stefan is that he says that he believes that the empathetic digital patient journey is key to making the experience not only better for the patient, but also bending the cost curve for the health systems. Gyant just raised a Series A of $13.6 million in June, so they're well on their way, and they have multiple partnerships around the United States. So welcome, Stefan. So we're also going to be joined by Jared Anczak. Jared is Director of Consumer Digital Experience at Intermountain Healthcare. And in this role, Jared has a goal to create an extraordinary consumer experience, and with an effort to do it regardless of resource restraints, technical limitations, and really looking at broad possibilities. So we're so pleased to have both Jared and Stefan here today. And you guys have your video on and you have your audio on too. Welcome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, guys. All right, so let's get right into it. Stefan, I'm going to start with you. So nice to have you here today. And can you just give us an overview of what Gyant does?
Of course, happy to. Thanks for having us on, Jennifer. So Gyant is a virtual assistant for healthcare. We offer an AI-driven chat solution that offers support and answers questions for patients throughout their care journey. So this includes helping patients figure out what kind of care they might need and where to go for that care that might be the best cost-effective or convenient option for them. But then also booking appointments, possibly finding the right specialist, and providing answers to common health questions. So the goal is to work with health systems as they're building out their virtual front door, and we're going to hear a lot more about that in today's conversation with Jared and Intermountain. And it's all about making it easier for patients to find the care they need.
Great, awesome. So Jared, welcome. Intermountain Healthcare, located in Salt Lake City, Utah, is the largest healthcare provider in the Intermountain West. That was a new term for me, in the United States. And give us a little bit of an overview of your system, what your specialties are, what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Intermountain Healthcare, as you mentioned, is a Utah-based not-for-profit system. We're comprised of about 24 hospitals, including a virtual hospital. We have a medical group with about 3,000 or so employed physicians and advanced practice providers. We have a health insurance company called Select Health, and we have about 42,000 caregivers, which makes us Utah's largest private employer. We also have a fairly sophisticated telehealth program with provider-to-provider video capabilities as well as direct-to-consumer video capabilities. And recently we launched our digital front door as a method to engage with our patients and consumers called My Health Plus.
Awesome, that's great. So you guys jointly developed and deployed a COVID-19 solution for detection and response. And what's so impressive about it is how quickly you did it as well. And I'd like to explore that partnership with you today during this conversation. So Jared, if you could start by telling us the story, how did you approach the partnership? What connected you to Gyant?
Yeah, so Intermountain embarked on a journey to achieve a very ambitious vision to create a best-in-class, consumer-centric digital experience through which we and our patients could interact with each other. And we called this the Digital Front Door Initiative. And we really started from the ground up using a human-centered design approach to really understand the consumer journey and identify pain points or points of friction, as well as the ideal state. If there were no limitations or barriers, what would that ideal state look like? And then from there, we worked backwards to develop our minimum viable product, or our MVP, which was released to our consumers just over 3 months ago, as I mentioned, as branded as My Health Plus. But one of the features we heard loud and clear from our consumers that they wanted was a way to check their symptoms and find the most appropriate care based on what they were experiencing. So from there, we conducted a build versus buy analysis and began a rigorous vendor analysis. And Gyant stood out from that analysis for a variety of reasons. First of all, their team was incredibly great to work with. They were flexible and accommodating, and they were really willing to partner with us to achieve what we needed from a strategic standpoint. We also assessed other criteria such as clinical accuracy, the ability to customize the triage recommendations to suit our specific system and what we have available for our patients, and the ability to integrate seamlessly into our MyHealth Plus digital platform. So from the beginning, we started with a proof of concept and then a pilot and then a full-fledged deployment. And throughout the entire process, Gyant was incredibly responsive and aligned. And then when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, Gyant again surprised us by rapidly developing a screening tool that we were able to quickly deploy across all of our websites. So as a result, we now have a Gyant symptom checker, COVID-19 screening tool, which our consumers can access all through a digital chatbot named Scout.
That's awesome. So that was my next question. Stefan, what does the solution do, and can you introduce us to Scout? And then also,
Sure.
just talk about the timing for a minute. I mean, you were already working at Intermountain, but while you're working the story, how fast did you pivot, and like, what did it take to figure it out in a month or weeks or whatever you did?
Yeah, interestingly for me, this started, I'm originally from Germany. So I was visiting friends and family in Europe at the end of February. And as you all recall, the virus initially took hold in Europe before it kind of made a big splash in the United States as well. So when I came back, I realized this is going to be a massive challenge for our health system customers and partners. So at the beginning of March, we got the team together, stopped everything else, and started working on, okay, what could we do on our side to facilitate patients that are worried well in most cases and are kind of concerned about being exposed or not sure what to do, and how can we help them at scale. So we quickly pivoted our front door technology into a virtual assistant that was purely focused on helping patients around COVID-related concerns. So that includes a portion of symptom checking and triage, but also answers standard questions, anything from what do I do to prevent it? How can my dog get it? So there's a lot of different topics that are covered. And we noticed that a lot of the health system partners we were already in touch with or working with, just like Intermountain, were inundated by phone calls from patients that were calling in, many of which did not have exposure or the virus, but they were still concerned. So fielding this initial kind of deluge of questions and concerns from the worried well became kind of the main focus. And so we quickly entered into a conversation with Intermountain and talked, I think it was a week or two or so until we actually ended up going live on the main website of Intermountain. And I think at peak we had thousands of patients using the tool to find out what they should be doing and where they should go for care. So I think this is one of the bigger success stories of our company's history, and we've since deployed this 25 more times with other partners.
Wow. And so Jared, just out of curiosity, did you already had the relationship with Stefan, right?
We did, yeah. We were starting down a path with another product and then quickly made this pivot. And I would just add that, you know, it was really incredible to see so many different people come together in such a rapid and efficient way to get this deployed, from compliance and legal to cybersecurity to, you know, contracting, all the way through to clinical, you know, validation with our providers and subject matter experts. We were able to stand it up very, very rapidly. It was really unprecedented, but it was really, I think, noteworthy as, you know, a healthcare system responded to the pandemic and engaged with Gyant in such a quick and rapid manner.
Right. Awesome. And so, Stefan, did you come up with the idea for the solution and bring it to Jared, or did you overhear Jared saying, you know, I think I'm going to need something? And that's one question. And the other is, Jared, did other vendors or other, you know, software companies come to you and say, we have a solution?
Yeah, I think in this case, it was us coming to Intermountain. I think we'd been thinking about what can we do, and we had kind of a concept. We were still in the process of building it, but Intermountain, because we were already working together, was one of the first partners we approached and say, hey, how are you thinking about addressing this this crisis, and what are you guys doing? And then that quickly led to the conversations around what exactly do we need to build? How do we need to configure the endpoints so it kind of maps into the existing efforts? How does it tie into with an existing helpline, the different care endpoints and so on? So that quickly turned from a first phone call into a partnership development or co-development over the matter of a week or two to actually get the product live.
Yeah, and I would say it was quite serendipitous because we actually were trying to answer the same question, and we wanted to sort of explore with Gyant what we could potentially do. And so we were in the process of getting our thoughts together when Gyant set up the meeting and said, here's a new product or a new thing that we could potentially deploy. And it just happened to be exactly what we were looking for. So again, everything just came together really quickly, and yeah.
Good. So Jared, can you talk about what progress has been like since you rolled it out, which as far as I could tell, the announcement came in April. So you were obviously working on it March and early April.
Yep, absolutely. So in the first about 4.5 months since we launched the COVID-19 screener tool on our websites, we've had about 300,000 screenings started with about a 94% completion rate, which is really, really great. And so we made it very easy. Gyant has made it very easy for consumers to go through the whole process and complete a screening. As Stefan mentioned, when we first launched during the height of the pandemic, we were seeing several thousand screenings per day. As things began to normalize, we've seen the average daily number, tick down a little bit and hover in the few hundreds. But, in the early days of the pandemic and the national quarantine, we had redeployed a lot of our caregivers to assist with our COVID-19 call center. And deploying Scout on our websites really alleviated some of that call center strain and enabled more bandwidth and capacity for those caregivers to really focus on those who really needed to speak with someone directly. We saw about 12% of people who came in through our chatbot ended up being screened out and just given education.
Oops, we seem to have lost Jared for a sec. Hopefully we'll get him back. Jared, you there? If you need to turn off your video for a moment, go ahead. Stefan, maybe I'll jump to you since Jared is closing for a second, but tell us how you structured the pilot. So obviously you guys were working on digital front door. This is a little bit of a different sort of product for you. And was there any key piece of advice or learning that you got from how you structured it with Intermountain?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't much about, let's say, structuring the interaction, because we already, at that point, had an ongoing relationship. We had gone through the security reviews, a BAA was in place, an MSA was in place. So it was fairly easy to add on the contractual side, it was fairly easy to add a 2-page statement of work and kind of get that out of the way and get going. And we already had ongoing working relationships with the digital team and the people that were working with us both on the design as well as the configuration of the options, the clinical configuration, and the engineering piece of this. So it was really just a 2-week pivot away from front door into, okay, how do we deploy the solution? And it went really quickly because we already had the existing relationships with everyone on the Intermountain side. So, and also a big kudos to the Intermountain team. I've not seen, in healthcare, at least, a team move so swiftly and so decisively and be so agile and just pivoting on the spot and deploying solutions like this and so quickly. So the entire process, I think, as Jared alluded to, took less than 2 weeks, and from while we were still building the product itself. So the deployment was incredibly fast, and then was actually aided by a significant communication effort around it to make patients aware of the tool's existence. And I think at the beginning, it actually took over the entire homepage of Intermountain Healthcare.org. So that I think also contributed to the large success in terms of utilization and just patients using this as a first-line tool to quickly get answers before they pick up the phone and call in.
Right, great. Jared, we want to let you continue on what you were saying before. You're actually, just so you know, you checked out when you were talking about alleviating strain to the call center.
Oh, okay, perfect. I was just about done. I noticed that my Zoom meeting froze, and so I had to jump out and jump back in. I apologize for the glitch. I think what I was saying is, deploying Scout really alleviated some of the call center strain which we were experiencing and allowed our caregivers who were redeployed at our call centers to really focus on those who needed to speak with someone directly. And ultimately what we saw was about 12% of our screenings ended up just resulting in education to the patient. So for a lot of those patients that were just seeking peace of mind or information, they were able to get that through the chatbot without having to, take a human person away from talking to somebody who really needed to chat with somebody about what they were experiencing. So that was a really big win for us.
That's awesome. And then Jared, you also mentioned that that was really important to you is that obviously the existing relationship was there with Gyant, but that credibility was really important in terms of just feeling very confident about the company. It's very hard for startups to get in the door, establish that credibility. Can you just talk to that point for a minute and in terms of, how that, sort of bubbled up for you and what it meant?
Yeah, I would say from a health system perspective, working with a startup is very different than, in many respects, than working with a really established vendor. Established vendors generally have an out-of-the-box product, and it's more of a take it or leave it kind of approach. There's very little room for customization. Startups, on the other hand, generally have more flexibility and willingness to align and partner to solve for strategic needs. And that's what we saw with Gyant. Quite frankly, they're more hungry and scrappy, and that comes with a variety of benefits. From a startup perspective, though, I think the unfortunate reality is that many healthcare systems are generally very risk adverse and change resistant and long-term oriented. And so, this is of course a generalization, and explains why it can be a challenging environment to really get your foot in the door as a startup to a big healthcare organization. In some instances, we've been burned in the past by startups who have failed or didn't adequately address security protections or regulatory compliance processes. Healthcare is a highly regulated industry, and so it's challenging to navigate through. Or were acquired by another company and discontinued supporting a particular product or service. So that said, I think healthcare needs to be disrupted. I mean, the topic of this webinar is partnerships transforming healthcare. So one point of, I think, advice is to just keep going, keep pounding as a startup. Timing is everything. When we first saw Gyant, we really had zero interest. The timing wasn't right. We had already deployed another solution to solve for that particular need. But when that company was acquired and we needed to find a replacement, Gyant was on the list of first things that we wanted to evaluate because we had seen a demo previously. And so it was really serendipitous to have that demo sort of front of mind so that we knew we had somewhere to start with. So even though it wasn't the right time initially, it became the right time later on and really led to a really strong partnership and relationship going forward. As far as risk mitigation, one of the easiest ways to pass the sniff test for a healthcare organization is to have an established precedent. So if you're working with another health system as a client, that's a really big deal for us, again, from a risk mitigation standpoint, because you've established a precedent that a lot of the kinks have already been worked out and that you're ready to engage in a more scalable way. And that's really important for a health system, I think, evaluating new solutions.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then Stefan, so this was a little bit of a different product for you. And then can you comment also to the startups in the audience about the difference between offering your standard product that you would like to pitch and then being very flexible, because it's kind of a double-edged sword?
It is indeed. I'd say the hardest challenge in healthcare as a startup is going from 0 to 1, right? Like, how do you overcome this initial resistance of, can I trust this company? Can I trust this people to manage, an important process for me that is very visible in this case because it's patient facing. So it's like it's a high stakes, high risk endeavor, and going from 0 to the first partner and then maybe to the second and the third, that's the hard part. And I would, for us at least, we took a very flexible approach, and we had an idea of what we wanted to do and a vision, and we still continue to pursue that vision. And we're actually now have gotten back to much closer to that initial vision. But we were willing to take detours if that allowed us to actually work with a partner that had visibility and that would help us to build trust in the industry as a reliable partner, and kind of help solve their problem if it's closely related to what we can do with our technology and what we wanted to do. And then maybe a little bit later in the second step, kind of go back to pursuing our vision. And that's pretty much exactly what happened with Intermountain. And that's also what happened with other partners like Cleveland Clinic or OSF, where the initial conversations were actually quite different, but then turned out to kind of go back to the original vision that we pursued.
Right, got it. And then Jared, you know, is there anything very specific that made this partnership a success for you? And the question is sort of, you were able to move very quickly inside Intermountain Healthcare. Your team is sort of oriented around innovation. If was there any one part of it that really made it sail through?
You know, I think one of the things that we did that was a bit unique but really effective here, especially working with a startup, we were able to creatively find ways to mitigate risk and make us feel really comfortable working with a newer organization, right? And one of the ways that we did that is just contractually, we were able to sort of phase gate our contract in a way that we had specific deliverables at specific intervals before moving on to the next step. And Gyant was able to successfully deliver every step along the way. And that really, again, gave that additional sense of credibility and trust and alignment strategically with this organization that they could do exactly what we needed them to do. And so I think that there's, you know, really creative ways that you can, as a healthcare system, you know, mitigate those risks or those concerns in a way that is mutually beneficial for both organizations.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you the last question before we get to the Q&A. Obviously, we're talking about partnerships that will transform care delivery. And in your opinion, humble opinion, how will this partnership transform care delivery? What is the thing that's happening that can really help to shift the way we deliver care right now?
You know, I think the default for a lot of people when they don't feel well and they're wondering what's going on is to just Google it. And when you Google your symptoms and you're trying to figure out what's wrong, you can get a variety of outputs that are not necessarily the most clinically accurate or valid, which can cause even more distress, depending on what you're experiencing. So that was something that we really wanted to address and also be able to route people into our system. So we're looking at things like how many people are using this chatbot and are actually seeking care within our system, because we're able to capture those people who are just curious and now need to be treated in a responsible way. I see this as really being an opportunity to keep costs down for patients and provide accurate assessments without stoking that unnecessary fear with, you know, an inaccurate or an exaggerated self-diagnosis from the internet. And I would also add that in the aftermath of COVID-19, there's a huge demand for digital tools to provide care and or information for patients who are doing their best to be socially distant. And I think that, you know, before COVID-19, chatbots were becoming more widely adopted in many industries, including healthcare. COVID-19 has just accelerated that, and it's made it all that much more commonplace. And so I think organizations are really ready to embrace digital tools to really assist, augment, and automate various aspects of the consumer experience.
Awesome. Stefan, did you want to comment on that?
I think that's there's very little to add. I think the only thing I would add is that while there's this aspect of kind of finding out what may be wrong with me and where I can go to get it fixed, I think there's also this added convenience of just being able to do it whenever you want to versus having to call in between 9 and 5 during service hours. I think most of us now prefer to be doing self-service on the website or on an app over calling someone, waiting 10 minutes in line, going through an IVR tree, and then getting your problem addressed. So I think that's just a natural consumer trend that is feeding into this. And the other piece is there are so many opportunities as now more and more encounters are virtual to actually digitize the entire patient journey. So it's not just about, okay, where do I need to go for my care, but also, well, while I have you here, let's check you in, or let's, you know, populate the answers that you already provided as part of the interview to help you find the right care option. Put that into the chart so that the provider or the medical assistant who then sees you and rooms you already knows what you're talking about, rather than asking the same questions 3 times along the journey. So I think there are opportunities to just integrate the care journey and make it significantly more convenient and streamlined an experience for patients.
Great, wonderful. And then we have some questions coming in. One for you, Stefan. You mentioned that first you were working with Intermountain Healthcare, and then you were able to take the solution to others. And the question is, once you did that, was it the same approach? You know, how did you build on what you had created in partnership with Intermountain to be able to expand that to other hospital systems?
Yeah, I think in general it was kind of the same approach. The difference was at that point we already had kind of a solution that was in the market and that we had been able to validate with Intermountain. And whenever, you know, this 0 to 1 is always the hardest step. Once you have a couple of examples with reputable partners like Intermountain out there, it's significantly easier for other health systems to trust and say, well, if they're doing it, then that's good enough for us, and let's just move forward. So it accelerated the conversation significantly once those first handful of deployments was out. And then the second piece, I think here is every healthcare system is slightly different. Like the different options that are available are slightly different inside the network. They may have different infrastructure, different partners for different parts of the service delivery. And so it was really important to take the general concept of what we were doing, but allow it to be configured specifically for a health system in their branding, in their language, with their specific care endpoints, so that they have control over the experience and the navigation part, while still having kind of the same service experience that you would expect. So we built the solution in a way to be easily configurable and deployable for health systems. That was kind of a design parameter for us from the beginning.
Wonderful. And then we do have one quick question for you, Jared, about accessing the right person within a healthcare system. And the question is, of course, do you go through individual providers or you know, what's the approach?
You know, it really is kind of a scattershot. I think in healthcare, we get a variety of introductions from a variety of places. Some vendors are introduced to us through our ventures wing within our organization. Others come to us through individual providers who have seen a product and are interested in us exploring it. Others come directly through, you know, I represent consumer digital experience, and so we'll get outreach directly. It is hard sometimes to understand what a startup does. And a lot of times when you get that sort of cold call email that's very generic, it's really easy to ignore. And so, you know, if that's your only mechanism because you don't have a contact at a healthcare system, I would just advise to be as specific as possible. And, you know, rather than requesting a conversation, offer a demo. You know, that goes a long ways to being able to actually see what it is that you're offering and whether or not it can strategically solve a need that we have.
Great. Oh, thank you so much, Stefan and Jared. We really appreciate having you today. Very insightful, and enjoyed your comments. And there are a couple more questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and maybe Stefan or Jared, if they're pointed at you, you could answer them. That would be fantastic. But thanks again, guys. So great to have you today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.